Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming out. My name is John Shriver-Blake, and I'm a product manager for Firebase. And I'll be joined later today by Mike McDonald, who's also a Firebase product manager. And we're here today to talk about building enterprise-grade mobile apps with Firebase. You see, lots of people know that Firebase is a great way to build great apps, and that it helps you throughout the life cycle of your app development process. It can help you build your app with with features like Firestore, cloud storage, and authentication. You can store and sync data in the cloud for your mobile app without running your own backend services. You can then build on top of that functionality using cloud functions to run backend code, once again, without your own servers. Finally, you can use Firebase to help you take advantage of ML in your app using ML-Kit and both client and cloud-side APIs. Beyond building your app, Firebase can help you with your app quality. You can use Crashlytics to get a real-time feed of your crashes as they happen in the wild. You can then use Crashlytics to prioritize and help fix those issues. You can also get a clear idea of your app's performance and how it's being perceived by your users, and improve upon your performance with Firebase Performance Monitoring. Finally, you can run tests for your app on devices managed by Google with Firebase Test Lab. Beyond quality, we can help you grow your app. This starts with Google Analytics for Firebase, which gives you free and unlimited app analytics, so you can have a clear understanding of what your users are doing in your app. Once you have that understanding, you can then optimize that experience using A/B testing, Firebase cloud messaging, and remote config to really get your users more engaged and using more of your app. Finally, we have predictions, which uses ML to analyze your users' behavior and creates custom groups so that then you can then target those users. For instance, there's a custom group for retention that'll give you an idea of users who are likely to churn. You can then use notifications or A/B testing or remote config to create specific experiences for those users to keep them from churning out of your app. There really is a lot that Firebase has to offer. The problem is, many people think that Firebase can't be used in an enterprise setting. And so I get questions all the time about security, compliance, privacy, and production readiness for Firebase. And so today, we're going to answer some of those questions and give you the information that you need to get Firebase deployed in your organization. Specifically, we're going to cover these three areas. Is Firebase ready for your organization? Can you manage your resources in Firebase and control access in the way that you need to? Is Firebase ready for your lawyers? Will it meet your regulatory and compliance requirements? And finally, is Firebase ready for production? Will it scale? Can you monitor it in the way that you expect? So first, let's talk about your organization. Can you manage and control access to Firebase projects in the way that you need to? The answer is yes. Firebase users can use Google Cloud's enterprise-grade tools to manage and control access to Firebase resources, which is great, right? And this is possible because when it comes right down to it, Firebase projects are cloud projects. Now, we in the Firebase team have often built tools to help users get onto the Firebase platform in an easy and simple way. But underlying all of it is Google Cloud Platform. And so users who want to can take advantage of the more powerful Google Cloud Platform tools to perform more advanced administrative scenarios. Let's talk about some of the tools that Cloud makes available for this type of management. The first is Google Cloud Resource Manager. This is your central way to manage Cloud and Firebase resources within your organization. It gives administrators the ability to view all of the projects and resources deployed in their org, to organize those projects in a hierarchy with folders, and then assign access at the org, folder, project, and resource level. Second is Cloud Identity. This is your centralized identity management solution for Cloud. It allows you to manage users and groups and supports products like single sign-on and two-factor authentication, so you can be sure that your users are having both a safe and secure user experience. Finally is Cloud IAM, which is Identity and Access Management. This gives you fine-grained access control of who has access to what in your organization. You do this by assigning roles to specific users and groups that give them limited access within Cloud. For instance, there's a role called App Engine Viewer which gives users the ability to view app engine configuration. Now, this is a fairly broad role, so you might assign it fairly broadly, let's say, to a group. On the other hand, you might reserve more of an edit role to a smaller set of people. Cloud IAM puts you in that level of control. Now, those are predefined roles. Something that Cloud IAM also supports are custom roles. And so if you find that the predefined roles that we've defined are not sufficient for your needs, you can get really granular and create roles with exactly the permissions that you need for your organization. Finally, I want to mention that all changes to IAM are audited and logged so that you can go back and get a clear view of what changes were made, when, and by whom in your project. Now, those of you who are familiar with Firebase probably know that today, we don't offer a lot of options for fine-grained access control with Firebase. Well, good news. Rolling out now is fine-grained access control for Firebase. This is actually available to some of you today and will be broadly available by the end of the summer. We've defined a set of predefined roles for Firebase users, like quality admin or developer viewer, that allow you to very easily give people in Firebase access to a limited subset of the functionality. In addition, we'll be supporting custom roles. So you can create your own roles with exactly the permissions that make the most sense for your organization. Now, this is all rolling out now, but I'm going to give you a preview of what it'll look like so you've got a good idea. OK, so here I am in the Firebase console. You can see I'm logged in as me. And I want to go ahead and give Mike access to my project so that he can send notifications. So I'm going to go into Settings. And this brings up a Firebase-specific user management UI. I'm going to go ahead and add Mike. There we go. And I'm going to select a role. And you can see in the role dropdown, there's the project-level roles that Firebase has always supported. But I can also give Mike custom access to Firebase. And you know, somebody who's going to wear shorts to a presentation, I'm not so sure I trust their professionalism. So I'm going to lock down Mike as much as possible by giving him only grow admin access, which means he can access notifications, but can't access, for instance, the contents of my database. So there we go. I'm going to add Mike. Cool. So let me switch over to Mike. You can see here I am logged in as Firebase Mike. And because Mike has grow admin access, if I go to cloud messaging, you can see he has full read-write access. But if I go to database, access denied. He needs to ask a project owner for the necessary permissions. So I've been able to grant access Mike to only the things that he needs, and I don't have to worry about him accessing things that he shouldn't be. Now, some of you may be thinking that these are a little too coarse-grained for you. And for those folks, you can use custom roles. So switching back to me, once again, logged in as me, I'm going to go ahead and show you how you do a custom role. Now, this is not something that we support in our UI, because it's more of an advanced user scenario. So I'm going to go ahead and click Advanced Permissions. And what this does is open up the full Google Cloud Platform console and the full IAM experience there. And if I go into the flyout here, you can see that there's really a lot of additional functionality that's available here for folks who want to take advantage of it. One of those things are roles. So as I load this up, you'll see there's a long list of the predefined roles. But in addition to those roles, I've created a special role just for Mike that gives him exactly the access that he needs and nothing else. So there's really a lot of flexibility here for those who need it. Finally, I mentioned audit logging. So I'm going to quickly move over to the Google Cloud Platform activity stream, which is a central place to see all of the administrative actions that have happened in your organization, including IAM. And it's a little slow. It's the Wi-Fi. I'm going to blame the Wi-Fi. Here we go. And there it is. So not only do I have a full activity view of all of the changes that have happened in my organization, it also reflects the change that I just made. Firebase John assigned Firebase Growth Admin to Firebase Mike. So I can get that full view of all the changes happening in my org, which is super important to me as a project administrator. So going back to the deck, the key takeaway for you for this section is that you can use the same powerful tools available in Google Cloud Platform to manage and control access to your Firebase resources. OK, so let's talk about our lawyers. Anybody who's ever deployed a new service in a large organization knows that it can be a real challenge, particularly because of the lawyers. If a service doesn't meet your compliance and regulatory needs, it can be a complete non-starter. In addition, GDPR and other emergent privacy regulations have made this much more complicated. We in Firebase want to make this easier for you, and we've been doing a lot of work to that end. And we're happy to say that today, Firebase is ready to meet most organizations' compliance needs, including helping you with GDPR. Now, before I get too much further, I want to make this really clear. I am not a lawyer, and this is not legal advice. If you haven't discussed some of these topics with a lawyer yet, I strongly suggest that you do. GDPR. So I had an interesting experience this past winter. I was at a water park with my son, and we were waiting in this very long line to get into the water park. And all of a sudden, a couple behind me, who also must have worked together, started talking about GDPR. And I could not understand why they were talking about GDPR at a water park. And they were really stressing out about it. They were going on and on about how much work they had to do, how many open questions they had, and how hard it was to get a straight answer. And it was only later that I realized that I was wearing this T-shirt. It says GDPR. Turns out that my GDPR T-shirt ruined that couple's vacation. I felt bad about that. I worked on GDPR for Firebase, and I could relate. It was a lot of work and a fair amount of stress. But with the benefit of hindsight, I've come to view it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to make sure that you're doing the right thing for your users and their privacy. So what we're going to talk about today is how to implement best practices for privacy and how Firebase can help you do that. We're going to cover these three specific areas that I think many app developers have challenges with and are particularly important today. One, are the services that you're using protecting your users' data properly? Two, do you have proper consent flows for your users? And three, are you giving users transparency and control that they need? Let's talk about the first one. It's almost impossible these days to build an app without relying on third-party services. Many of you are probably using Firebase, Google Cloud Platform, and any number of other services in your app. If those services have access to user data, it's really important that you have a clear understanding of what data those services are capturing, how that data is protected, and how it's used by those services. And it's on you as the app developer to ensure that all of that is compliant with your privacy policy, terms of service, and consent experience. How can Firebase help with this? Well, first, in order to help you be more confident in Firebase's privacy and security practices, we've been working hard to get industry standard certifications for Firebase. You can see that we already have a bevy of ISO and SOC certifications for many Firebase products, and we're continuing to expand this constantly. You can see just recently we added ISO 2717 and ISO 2718 for Firestore, and you'll see more of these over the coming weeks, months, and years. In addition to third-party certifications, something new with GDPR is the concept of a DPST. What a DPST is a legal agreement between you and your service provider that governs how they are protecting and using your user data. If you're subject to GDPR, it's very important that you have these in place with all of your service providers. The good news is that Firebase makes this really easy. All Firebase services are covered under a DPST, and that DPST is included by default in our terms of service. So if you're using our products and you've accepted our most recent terms, you're covered under our DPSTs. OK, consent flows. I want to highlight consent flows because the standards for consent flows are changing. A consent flow that was totally fine a year or two ago may not be fine under current norms. And so if you haven't reviewed your flows recently, I strongly suggest that you do. The overall goal here is to make it really clear to your users what data you're collecting about them and how you're going to use it, and getting really clear consent for that use from your users. There's been a lot of back and forth about checkboxes versus buttons. The main takeaway here is that you want to get really, really clear consent from folks. Now, once you have that experience right, you're not quite done yet. There's a few other things that tend to trip up developers. One is you need to be really careful about what data you're collecting before you have consent from your users. We see this all too often where people accidentally collect data that they shouldn't be when their app starts, for instance. Be very careful that you're not doing that. 2, you need to make sure that you're recording consent in a way that you can prove it. So if a regulator comes to you down the road and says, do you have consent for user X, you should be able to prove that on your backend. So how can Firebase help? First, Firebase has done a lot of work to improve your control over how data is collected and when. We have a number of services like Crashlytics and Analytics, for instance, that by default wake up when the app wakes up and starts collecting data. In some cases, that's totally fine. In other cases, you may decide that you want to get consent before that data is collected. So it's now possible with all Firebase services that have this behavior to change their default behavior. So you can configure them not to load on start and activate them programmatically when you have consent and you're ready to gather the data. In addition, we've published some example code for notice and consent. This includes UI for how to get consent, but also how to store consent with Firebase in a way that gives you the tracking that you need. This is available today in our FriendlyPix app. And for those of you who aren't familiar with FriendlyPix, it's an open source app for Android, iOS, and web that shows you actually a bunch of things about how to build on Firebase. So I strongly suggest that you take a look at that to get a better idea of how to get this critical experience right. All right, finally, are you offering users transparency and control of their data? The key goal here is that your users should have clear visibility into what data you have about them, and that they should be in control of that data. I've put up a screenshot here from the Google My Activity Center, which I think is a really good example of how to do transparency and control well. This is available to all Google users, and when you log in, it gives you a detailed view of your usage of Chrome, Search, Android, and a bunch of other developer tools. It's really quite exhaustive. You can see it includes individual searches that I've run on Google. In addition to giving me a lot of transparency, it also puts me in control. I can delete individual records. I can delete data in bulk. I can even export data for use outside of Google services. I think this is a really good example of what we all should be doing to provide our users more transparency and control. So how does Firebase help with this? First, we've looked through all of our applications and all of our services to make sure that they have really good delete support. So that, for instance, if you get a request to delete a specific user's data, you can go through and delete Crashlytics data or Analytics data associated with those users. Some of our services didn't have the best support there, and that's all been updated recently to ensure that you can be in compliance with GDPR. In addition, we've published an export and deletion guide that demonstrates how to properly handle user deletion and user export for apps built on Firebase. It's actually really quite powerful and simple using the power of Cloud Functions. And so I'm going to walk you through a little bit of how that works. Before I do, I want to mention that this is all up on GitHub in the Firebase repository under user privacy. It's open source, so you can grab it today and start using it in your apps. OK, so I mentioned we're going to use Cloud Functions in order to do this stuff. And what's great about Cloud Functions is the flexibility you have in terms of when functions are kicked off. In this case, we're going to take advantage of the fact that Firebase authentication is an event emitter. And so you can see at the top of this code, we're keying off of functions.authUser.onDelete. What this means is that when a Firebase auth user gets deleted, this function will get called and then clean up the rest of the data. Now, this is really very flexible. You could also rely on an HTTP request to kick this off. You could even use our client-side SDK to kick off this function. Once it's initiated, this function basically just goes through and calls wipeout calls for each one of our services in Firebase. So let's go ahead and look at the database wipeout call. Once again, fairly simple function. What this does is it loads in a number of paths from a config, and then iterates through those paths, deleting each one of them from the database. But where does the paths come from? Well, they're over here in userprivacy.json. You can see here, I've specified two paths, users and admins, both in this case keyed off of the user ID. So I can know that when my auth user gets deleted, the data at these two paths will also get deleted. This also works for other services, and I've included an example of how this would work in storage further down. So there it is. With a few simple functions, I can rest assured that when my Firebase auth user gets deleted, their data is out of my system as well. So the key takeaway for you is that Firebase has done a lot of work to make sure that we can meet the compliance and regulatory needs of most organizations, and that we've done a lot of work to help you be compliant with GDPR. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mike, who's going to talk about taking your Firebase app to production.
Thanks, John. OK, so John just showed functions code that needs to get deployed somewhere. He showed databases and storage buckets. How do we know that that code is actually going to scale once it's out in production? And once it's out there, how do we know that John didn't just copy those blindly from a GitHub repo and deploy them and assume that they work? Right? We need to verify that our functions aren't crashing, that code is actually running and doing what we think it will. And lastly, we have to make sure that we're not breaking the bank. Right? We don't want someone from finance crawling up into our cubicle and saying, you're spending way too much money, you need to shut that down, because that's a critical part of your business. So let's tackle those individually. Because Firebase is built on top of cloud, it can both scale to meet those incredible needs of your organization, but with tools like functions and serverless, we're also making sure that we can do it economically. So we'll start with scale. A lot of Firebase features, like Cloud Firestore, Cloud Storage, and Cloud Functions, as the name implies, are built on top of Google Cloud. So you can use the Firebase client SDKs and our really, really nice console to maximize developer productivity. And then if you need to do things like automate the creation of storage buckets or create different environments for all of your functions, you can also use the power of the various tools that Google Cloud provides in order to kind of supercharge and provide the granular customizability that you need. One of the other things because of that is that a lot of Firebase services like those are available in other regions. So cloud storage, for instance, you can create buckets in all of these regions. And actually, it's probably out of date, because I bet we probably just launched new regions today or sometime in the recent past. But we have a ton of different regions, so you can meet either compliance needs or performance needs, right? If you have users in Australia, for instance, you might want to have buckets in Australia to meet either the Australian data locality requirements or just simple performance. Along that lines, today, or in the recent past, or in the recent or near future, Cloud Functions will be offering regionality support. So you can actually take your functions and deploy them exactly where your users are. You can just type in -- region and deploy to whatever region. This will be coming for Cloud Firestore as well in the future. OK, so we've deployed all of our various resources. How do we know that those resources are actually doing what we say they're doing? So that's where StackDriver comes in. So StackDriver is not only Google's monitoring solution, but it will also do alerting. It will do error reporting. Basically, it's kind of the one-stop shop for your operational needs. Firebase has a number of integrations with StackDriver, so you can take a look at the various cloud integrated services and see which pieces of StackDriver are currently included. So a ton of things kick out metrics to StackDriver monitoring, and therefore you can alert based on changes to those. And then Cloud Functions provides really nice logging and error reporting that I'll demo later. So we'll show it right now, and then we'll demo it in a minute. But John went and deployed a bunch of functions. FriendlyPix, I think, actually has about 15 different functions running in the background for everything from cleaning up user accounts after they've been deleted to, it's a pictures on the internet app. So what are people going to post on the internet? Horrible, ridiculous content. So we actually have a function that runs the Cloud Vision API, and it will pull in the photo, do a NSFW or inappropriate content filtering on it, and then decide whether or not to moderate it. And again, that's a business critical thing. So look up here, make sure that nothing is erroring out. And on the case that something is erroring out, we can actually dive into StackDriver error reporting and take a look at exactly what error is occurring. So if you notice here, we can see things like permission denied. I couldn't write to the database because something happened. Or you can actually see, if you look at mine, that I don't know how to program JavaScript. And so I get a bunch of crazy JavaScript errors that are basically just like, hey, Mike doesn't know how to program. But you can start doing things like opening or closing those, or acknowledging them that someone is working on it, and kind of track that. So we'll demo that right at the end. OK, so we've kind of verified logs are looking good. We're getting, hopefully no errors showing up in error reporting. Now we want longer-term monitoring. So we want to make sure that the cloud is up and still responding. But we also may want to know things like how much data is being added to our storage bucket, right? So how many pictures are being added per day? I want to know, because finance has told me that I can only spend $100 a month on this app. I want to start sending, making sure that I'm not storing more than 100 gigabytes of data. I can use StackDriver monitoring to start setting alerts and understanding, maybe put up a big dashboard for the entire team to see what growth looks like and start setting alerts based on that. A bunch of different Firebase products offer a ton of different metrics on this. And as I mentioned, you can then, through StackDriver, start dashboarding these things. So this is a dashboard that I built for FriendlyPix that has data stored. So I set a 5 gigabyte alert. So 5 gigabytes, I think, is the free tier limit for storage. So I said, hey, I want to draw a line across that and make sure that I'm not getting close, and then set up an alert based on that. Similarly, I want to track other key metrics like bandwidth or requests coming into the database and storage. And as I said, I can then set up policies based on those metrics. So this is my alert for 5 gigabytes. So you can see, let me know anytime the total bytes metric is above 5 gigabytes for more than 1 minute. And I will send that email to Firebase Mike. Though I could if I wanted to, and I actually have services running that send me really annoying text messages if my Minecraft server goes down, just to make sure that everything is up and running. And these alerts are actually great because you can add markdown documentation. So for instance, maybe you already have a playbook for your service. You can actually drop that playbook documentation directly into it. So whenever I get an email where my Minecraft server goes down, it actually has exactly the 3 steps that I usually just have to copy and paste because I haven't automated it. Directly into SSH into the machine, fix it, and I'm done, right? So you get everything there, and then you get another email saying, hey, we've cleaned up the issue, everything is good to go again. And this is actually an exact example of that, right? Where you see, hey, Minecraft server is failing. Right down at the bottom, we have the policy documentation that is literally just, hey, make sure the VM is still running, mount whatever appropriate disks, et cetera, et cetera. And then when it's fixed, you can see, hey, the violation has ended. Everything is all clear. The last thing, we talked about all of those finance people cropping up in unexpected times right when your service is on its stellar growth. You need to make sure that, one, you can estimate the cost of your service. So we've provided cost calculators through both Firebase and Google Cloud to understand, hey, maybe you're building a chat app and you want to send a certain number of messages, or you're storing a certain number of pictures. We can let you kind of slide around and see approximately what it's going to cost to run on our infrastructure. And because you want to ensure that once your thing is running, you're not going to just completely blow your budget away, you can actually start setting budget alerts. So I set a budget alert here that I don't want to spend any more than $50 a month running my Minecraft server. So I set at 50%, send me an alert at 90%, and at 100%, send me an email that just says, hey, Mike, FYI, you're coming up on your budget alert. And one of the things John and I were actually talking right before this talk, we've kind of created this fun meta recursive system where you can actually have billing alerts trigger functions that would then let you say shut off resources, which is kind of fun because those functions also cost money and would end up in this weird world where who knows what you could end up doing. But that's kind of the system that we're trying to build, right? We're giving you all of the tools, and then in Firebase we're working to kind of automate that and orchestrate it to give you really the control you need at a high level. So let's switch over to the demo, and I will actually show you by building a couple of things how this all works. So here we're looking at the backend for FriendlyPix, and hopefully everyone can see that in the back of the room. But you can see a bunch of logs that we have, and you can start seeing things like, oh, we're getting some warning. So maybe I want to actually dive into that, and we can just search for warning. And I can say load more logs, load older logs, scroll through, et cetera. And there are actually a ton of things that give out logs. So I can, for instance, look at various audited resources and say, hey, I want to know everything calling the Vision API, or I want to know all of the changes that have been made to the Google OAuth client ID. And a bunch of that information also shows up. And if I want, I could also dive into, say, particular functions. And maybe I know that one of these functions is being problematic. I want to look for logs on that. Not only can I kind of filter by doing arbitrary text, I could filter by kind of any of these other columns. Maybe only give me critical errors in all functions. And hopefully in the last hour there have not been any critical errors, though we'll let it load and see if that is actually true. If there are, I recommend deleting friendly picks. No. Yeah, there you go. So nothing is horribly broken in friendly picks right now. And if it was, so actually we did this talk at I.O., and we were having errors, so I immediately added all sorts of alerting, and now the developers get pinged whenever anything happens. And so clearly they have fixed all of the bugs in friendly picks because of that. OK, so speaking of those alerts, I'll actually pop open to some that I've resolved or muted. We'll see. I thought I had some more. I guess everything is going well because we only have one. So we can dive in and we can see, hey, we've been failing to send notifications. We can actually see the entire stack trace of, hey, here's the JavaScript code. So you can see, where is it? Yeah, a bunch of server errors, whatever. A message targeted to an iOS device could not be. So it's an APNS certificate issue. So now that's kind of given us all the things that we need to then go and fix the problem. You can also see kind of all of the instances when this has happened, as well as this will have kind of time correlation. So you can see, hey, maybe this only started 2 days ago. Is there something that we did in our infrastructure 2 days ago that made this occur? And then when you're done, you can say, hey, I've acknowledged that this is the case. You can actually stick in, say you're using GitHub and someone has filed an issue. You can stick in GitHub issue tracking or Jira or whatever tool you're using and acknowledge it there. So you have this kind of other tracking built in. Over to the dashboards. So this was the dashboard that we saw earlier that showed the 5 gigabyte storage threshold. You can see both database and cloud storage, as well as bandwidth, storage, et cetera. So I'm going to actually add another one. I want to start tracking those function invocations. So we had 6 or 7 functions. I want to know which ones are being called. Is there any correlation between them? Maybe if something happens, I want to know if one of those functions is going haywire. So I'll add another chart. And so we'll just call that functions executions. And we'll say cloud functions. And there's an executions metric that tells us count of cloud functions executions broken down by status. And so you can actually see we have a ton of different functions. For instance, how much memory each function is using and how many times they're being invoked. I only care about filtering by the function name, right? But I could say, oh, I want to know functions in this region and maybe measure their latency and see if the functions in a certain region are faster or slower than functions in another region. But for now, we'll just group them by function name and do the sum, right? I only care about the total number of functions being executed, potentially across all regions or regardless of status code. But I may want to say only give me functions that succeed or only give me functions that fail. So we'll save that. And we can see immediately we get that new dashboard. Note, that's only for the past day. We could also start doing historical things. So I'd actually already loaded that, so it was pretty quick. But this is the past week of function executions. So I can kind of scroll through there. Again, we're not seeing terribly interesting things. Maybe in the past month we'll see, yeah, so you can see a couple spikes. I'm curious if around I.O. or when we launched this if there were some more spikes. But OK, so this would be like a great dashboard that you could set up for your team. And the last thing would be setting up an alerting policy. So I have a couple pretty simple alerting policies. So I have one that says, anytime storage is over 5 gigabytes. But I also have a couple other more interesting ones. For instance, let me know if the number of objects in my storage bucket has doubled in the past 12 hours, right? And that could indicate, hey, maybe my app really got popular on the App Store. And kind of gives you this kind of heads up of maybe I need to start different financial planning or just maybe our marketing team has done something that may affect our infrastructure. So I'll create another alert, right? We have a simple one for storage being over quota. I will copy that and create one for the database and do a similar thing, right? I want to know when, let's pull it up, and the resource that we'll use when the real-time database is So we can do, and the real-time database has a ton of different metrics, but we'll do bytes stored. And the condition, if it is above, and we'll do let's try, I think that should be 1 gigabyte, because it's all in bytes, for more than 1 minute. And we will save that condition. And then, as you can see, I could start adding notifications. I could actually send it to the mobile app. I could SMS myself. I could send it to a Slack channel. Kind of, we're trying to meet you wherever you are as a team. For now, we'll just send it to my email. Again, I could add some docs. You know, I don't really know what to do here. Maybe this is, you know, send an email to someone to let them know. Who knows? And we'll call this database over quota threshold. And we'll save that policy. And we'll go back. Cool, we have that policy, and you can see. I have not, unfortunately, found a great way to start triggering these, because obviously it takes a little bit, and you know, for instance, storage isn't monetized immediately, but you'll have to trust me. I get these emails all the time. They're fantastic. I will show one other thing. I will pop over to the billing tab, and I don't actually know if I can do that. I'll switch projects and show you a billing account in a different project. I like how it shows it, and then immediately, there we go. So I do have a billing account for here, and I will show you billing alerts. So go to the linked billing account. So I can set up a budget that is my $50 a month spend limit. And you can see that trigger alerts at 50%, 90%, and 100%. And you can see there that I've used $7.68 out of $10, which is, I guess, that. Oh, I ramped it down. We'll actually call that a $10 a month spending limit. Linked to a project, I can say, hey, target it to last month's spend and let me know if I'm above last month's spend, which was, I guess, $10.60. Or I could enter, you know, maybe I'm going to bump it up and call it 15. Note how it auto-calculates, too. So I can add just a percent. Maybe, you know, notify me at 150% of my budget, just in case I keep going over. And as John mentioned, you can connect this up to a pub subtopic, which can get fed into functions, so that you could start turning resources off or do other things. So we'll save it. And I bet, actually, if I set it below, I could get an email and prove it to you there. But we won't do that. Oh, other way. OK, back to the slides. So John talked about Firebase being ready organizationally and kind of from a legal and compliance standpoint. And then I talked about productionization, scaling, monitoring, alerting, understanding kind of the finances of your application. So yes, at this point, we believe that Firebase is ready for the needs of large organizations. There's still a lot to work on. But as we integrate deeper with Google Cloud Platform, we'll keep getting more of the compliance, more regionality, more awesome monitoring and scaling and budget alerting through Google Cloud. So thank you, everyone, for coming. We'll be around after for questions if you have them. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of Next.